Hi, everybody. Welcome to our group review. And thanks for your patience. I was a little bit under the weather yesterday and delayed in doing the critique until today. So, again, thanks for hanging in there. Um, okay, so this is a really interesting assignment because what we're doing is we're starting to work with words or typography, you could say, in the design sense of it. Taking a word and using a typeface to try to communicate a meaning. But essentially, I have an example here. I actually kept this example in my digital files for forever. I think you can still find it on the internet. That's where I originally found it. And I've used it in typography classes to sort of kind of ex contextualize how typography or typefaces or fonts uh, can really influence the meaning of a word. And that's the power of what designers have. So there are two words here. There's love and there's hate. And there's four different variations using four different typefaces. Now, what typography really is just shape, isn't it? Shape, you could say shape and line. And so depending upon how you work with the shape and line, it can convey different types of meanings. So let's just start with the love. If you take a look at this row of this column of four words, love, in different typefaces, just look at them for a minute and in your mind, pick one of them, one, two, three, or four, that you think is most closely associated in terms of the sort of effect of the typography with what you think of as love. So when I've asked this in person with students, invariably everybody picks this one right here. You may have picked this one, that this typeface, it's this typeface. You can see if you look at it, it's very smooth. The lines kind of very elegant. Kind of just has this very sort of effortless, like a handwriting, but a very smooth, controlled handwriting. It's kind of a gentle quality too, with the kind of rounded shapes, and that sort of associates us with the our understanding of love, like the kind of positive feeling of love, right? And then if we go through the other ones, this one here, um, sometimes people will go with this one as the next one, maybe, potentially. But this one is a little bit more, it's kind of like medieval or kind of, it has kind of almost like a biblical quality. This one's very neutral. It's like maybe Arial, the font called Arial, or something, like just a real simple modern font that's, you could say is fairly neutral. Doesn't have a lot of personality other than just being easy to read and kind of a professional font. So this last one is really kind of crazy looking, isn't it? It's like kind of very kind of splattery. It almost looks like something from a crime scene. It has kind of like a out of control quality to it, with the kind of loose shapes, painter sort of style. And so this one is actually a very, kind of, if you say, what does this kind of, like I sometimes ask students, like, what kind of love does this convey? The kind of quality of love, and people say, oh, it's like psychotic love or kind of stalkery or really, unpleasant, you know? So by which to say, the words themselves have a meaning, so we have an association with the word love, but then as designers, we can temper that. We can reinforce it. In this case, you can see this is reinforced. We can also contrast it, so we kind of build another meaning into it. So now we have love, but we have a, very different type of love, you know? So it's like you can kind of play with how you work with typefaces, to enhance the existing meaning or to enhance it in kind of a different way. And then if we look at hate, same thing, you can pick out which one of these do you think is the most reinforcing to the idea of hate, like makes it seem the most hate. And most of the time students will pick this one, maybe this one next, because if this is kind of sharp and pointy, it has kind of an edge to it. This one, of course, is just the most, maybe. And then, this is the most neutral, and then this is one that in a way counteracts it, sort of softens it in some way, or gives it a slightly different meaning or a twist to, just 100% hate. You know what I mean? Because it softens, all the curves really soften it up and make it seem sort of gentler. Okay, so I just want to say that, but the thing I also want to keep just you to keep in mind that really typography is just based on shapes, sort of square shapes, geometric shapes, organic shapes, pointed, sharp, thin, thick. Those all can help to convey the meaning. I also want to just touch into the assignment itself. Just kind of touch into on the instructions. So in addition to typography, you're going to be using color to convey the meaning of, whatever phrase or sentence you chose. And, everybody can interpret it how they like. We'll sort of look at that, and maybe see if there's ways we can sort of push that mood if we need to. But color and typography are the two ways that we're working with the sentence that you've chosen. Um, there's not a lot else, I guess, in terms of restrictions other than I think that a maximum of 3 typefaces, styles of type. And I think that in terms of color, you can work with achromatic, which is really just a very neutral color scheme. Achromatic is like maybe grayscale, like just grays, like blacks, grays, and white colors. Monochromatic means just one single hue, like you could use all green or all red, and then either warm or cool. Um, Now, I just want to say that our assignment itself, the example, I haven't taught this class for a while, so some things have changed since I've last uh, looked at it, and I'll just say that this example is actually warm and cool. So unfortunately, I'm going to drop a note to course development and see if that maybe it's something they can look at, because it isn't really following. Everything else follows the directions, but this in particular doesn't. So just keep that in mind. Okay, all right, let's get started. Okay, Mark. Okay, yeah, I love this assignment too because I always get introduced to new music that I'm not familiar with, and this is a great line, isn't it? So I can't stop drinking about you. So it's sort of a play on I can't stop thinking about you, you know. And yeah, I think this is a really interesting way of working with color. So you made it achromatic, which I think it's sort of in the way you've done it is really interesting because it's almost like I can sort of see going from light to dark. Like as you drink, you sort of you black things out, or you actually literally black out, which I don't know if you were thinking of, but that's what came to mind. And so I think that color choice is very nice, and also kind of the fuzziness about it too, how you get more fuzzy with when you drink, your mind, and also the choice of typeface too, the way you have worked with, so this typeface, so these are, it's just a lighter, sort of softer typography, like it's sort of kind of got that organic light look. I can't stop and about are in that typeface, and then drinking is really emphasized, which I like, in a different, like a contrasting typeface that's more, heavier and more solid, and then you add this little fade to it. And then you at the bottom is separated, so it gives you some kind of distance. It's almost like you say, I can't stop drinking about, and then you go down to the bottom, you pause and you go down to the bottom and you go you. And that's in a different typeface too, that's separate from the other two. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. With typography, I often sort of think about a voice in my head because I feel like typography sort of brings almost like literally a voice, like a, male, female, child, old person, young person, different kinds of qualities of voices, like almost like a commercial. And to me, that typefaces sort of somehow bring that personality through, and become an actual sort of abstract person. So each of these have sort of slightly different sort of personalities. Um, okay, yeah, I think this looks good. I don't need see any changes. I think it looks very complete, and I like the kind of the symmetrical look that you've worked with here. I think that works very well with your design. Yeah, Lori, I think that what you mentioned in your comments is interesting. How you said that you were focusing on you chose a cool color harmony and a wispy typeface because you felt that it went with your lyrics, and that's a really, I mean, I think that's what everybody tends to do is sort of analyze the sentence that you've chosen, to try to pick up on the qualities within the sentence and how you can turn them into a visual form. Like, so this, you decided this would be cool because, cool harmony, color harmony tends to, it's a little bit more introverted, um, mm, makes sense with the idea of dreams. You know, it seems to it sort of recedes. Cool colors are just a little bit more on the peaceful, tranquil, quiet side. So I think that was a good choice. And also wispy, the idea of dreams kind of fading away or dissolving. So you've sort of looked for typefaces that had that quality. So yeah, I think that looks great. And I like the way you have chosen, you know, the dreams is going to be the most faded, you know, so you changed the color here. Yeah, I think that looks really good. So only a couple things I might experiment with this. Uh, the first is the background. I may consider, I don't know if you tried doing this, but instead of putting a white background, maybe something darker. Even though I know that you don't necessarily want a dark feeling overall, but to let the kind of, it's almost like the white, what happens, maybe not too dark, it could be maybe just a pale color that you work back there. Sometimes when you have a white background, with so much white, it can kind of grab our attention, so we go to the background instead of the foreground. So sometimes even just putting a tinted background back there can help. Sometimes you can try with like a really dark background and let your lighter elements float on top, so they become the sort of the dreamy elements on top. So you could experiment with that as well. I think that's about it. There's also maybe, it looks like something happening here, maybe a little bit of an effect, like a kind of a like a lens flare effect or something. I'm not 100% if you really need that. It feels like maybe you don't need to have that. It feels like it would work just as well without it. Um, but yeah, otherwise, I think this is looking really good. I like the play in size. You know, that's what we call contrast. And I think that especially in typography, we really can see how contrast can really create that punch in a design. So something small versus something big. And again, this isn't a typography class, but in general, the rule of typography is, you know, there's actual principles within typography, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, which we're not going to learn in this class. But contrast is the one that all designs should have this idea of small and big. And if text is too close together, what you want to do is make it more different. Does that make sense? So like you don't want to change like just a few points difference. You want like a more dramatic small and big, you know, which you have done here. I just wanted to use your design as a kind of a talking point on that. Okay, Wander. Yes, cool colors with snow. That's perfect. You know, when we think of cool colors, we think of the temperature cool, you know, actual things feeling cool. And that actually, when we look at color, whether it's warm um, colors or cool colors, that is one of the things we think about. You know, one of the properties of each of those is the temperature quality. You know, warm colors feel warmer, you know, where, you know, if you have a room that you want to warm up in some way, you often will paint it like a warm color to give you that sense of coziness. Okay, yeah, I think that looks really good. And so I love this phrase. I like the way you kind of worked with dashing. So dashing is in italics, and then through, you've got that kind of cool O kind of like play, you know, with something going through. And the snow is a different typeface. So I would just say experiment with, I would experiment a little bit more with contrast. You know, maybe making one of these words a little bit bigger. Sometimes that can really anchor it. I almost wanted to make this a little bit bigger. Can even overlap if you like a little bit. Sometimes overlapping can be nice. You know, like overlapping words. You want to, you know, if you make a word really big, sometimes having another word overlap can be a good sort of solution for space. Of course, sometimes overlapping can make text a little harder to read, so you got to be careful with that. But I would then also experiment with lining things up in the design, in the sense of, you know, how the tutorial, the video tutorial or the video explanation for this assignment talks about how you can make text look intentional by lining it up. It's like I almost want to take this dashing and line it up with this, you know, move it over a little bit. Maybe this could be, you know, tucked in down a little further, kind of, you know, maybe it doesn't have to line up, but maybe it could sort of fill this space a little bit more. Um, I also might put something in the background, like a color in the background, maybe a very pale, like take one of these colors or any one of these colors and make it a little paler and put that back there to just kind of ground the background and make it seem like it's, you know, pulled into the design a little bit more. Um, Again, you know, if you keep it really pale, that way you can see, you know, can read all the letters. Okay, yeah, that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Just alignment, maybe a little bit more with contrast and experimenting with the background. Okay, Ebony, yes, warm colors. So we've gone from some design, looking at some designs that used cool colors to looking at a design that has warm color, and you can really see the difference. You know, warm is a lot more, there's more energy in it. You know, it's not quite as quiet, and it's a lot more sort of got kind of potency to it. We think of it as warm in terms of temperature. Um, and you know, even if in terms of this class, like the warm, cool colors, you know, thinking of these two things that we're looking at, if you just kind of keep those in mind in future designs, those can go a long way to helping you figure out what kind of color to put in your design. You know, do you want it to kind of be cooler, tranquil, peaceful, or do you want it to have the fiery quality of the warm colors, you know? And that just that single choice alone can really, again, really be very useful. So yeah, I like a lot of your kind of choices here, like this kind of contrast here between these texts, like this kind of more formal, authoritative text here. You know, it's kind of got a traditional text with this kind of looser text here, handwritten text. So I would say in yours too, what I would work on is lining things up a little bit more. And seeing how you can, you know, what lining things up can do is can bring elements that sort of feel detached from a design and bring it into the design. So right now, these are starting to, this to me starts to feel like a unit, which is good. This feels like a unit too, although I'd like to see this lined up in some way too. It feels like, again, it's sort of maybe yeah, maybe line that up, just do a straight line for these, and then somehow see if you can bring these in. Maybe you don't need as much text here. Maybe you could reduce some of the text. Maybe it's a little bit too much. But I would keep experimenting with that, with just bringing, you know, take a look at that, the video from the assignment directions on lining things up, see if you get any sort of additional inspiration from it. But that's what I'd probably work on here as well. And then watch using too many different typefaces. I think you have one, two, well, you have one, two, maybe you just have three. Yeah. So that's okay. Then that's then a good number of typefaces. Just kind of lining things up. Um, and that's what I'd work on uh, in your design. Just keep experimenting. Kendra, yeah, so in yours, it looks like you've got some warm colors and some cool colors. So I would choose one or the other. Now, what are the warm colors? Red, orange, yellow. What are the cool colors? Blue, purple, and green. So you can kind of have one of those, like so you can have all red variations on red, or you can combine, you know, all of the warm colors or all of the cool colors. But just decide which one of these you think best exemplifies your song lyric. Is it the warm, fiery colors, or is it the cool, tranquil, more peaceful, cool colors? You know, I can see it going either way. So it's up to you kind of how you want to kind of figure this out. And then what I would do is just a couple things more. I would experiment first with more negative, taking more of the background for your design. Right now you've got a lot of background. Just think about balancing that with more negative space. Now, how do you do that? You find a typeface that maybe is a bit blockier, or you make your type bigger. You know, like this, for example, maybe this gets really big and becomes your anchor for your design, you know, which I could see, you know, really filling up the space, and then the other words sort of float around it. Um, and then I would think about lining things up. Where can you, like, I think this is starting to line up. Maybe this needs to line up with something. This needs to line up with something. Again, just take a look at those, the tutorial or explanation video, just to get a better sense of how to line things up and what you want to do with that. Um, Another thing I just want to say as a general note for everybody, now you can always work up with, you know, as many as 3 typefaces. But you don't need to. Sometimes just even one typeface or 2 typefaces will often make a stronger design. You know, 2, you can contrast the voice of each. You know, maybe one's really, you know, simple, one's more dramatic. So don't, you know, feel like you need to use all 3. Sometimes that's a little too much in a design. And in yours, you know, I love this typeface right here, Justice Foxy. I think that's a really great one. Somehow it just conveys that. It's got that quality. Whereas somehow I don't feel like this typeface is necessarily, it looks like maybe you were thinking, oh, I gotta get something that's bad, which I think would be great, but it doesn't seem very bad to me. It seems kind of fun and kind of, kind of goofy. So maybe think about maybe experimenting a little bit more with this typeface, maybe even these typefaces, kind of thinking about the voice of them, how they can convey that. Also their visual weight. Maybe you need ones that have a little stronger visual weight so you can fill that negative space. Okay, so that's what I'd experiment on a little bit more. Velvet. So I love the idea of your ideas, and I like your lyric here. Why not just set her free? Um, yeah, so sometimes I think what happens in design is we have a lot of great ideas, and sometimes they will just flow into the design, and sometimes they don't flow into the design. It happens to all of us. And in your case, maybe I think what might have happened is that you have maybe too many good ideas. This free is a great idea here, like letting the letters just be free. And I might stick just with this as your main kind of visual idea. And I might take the other words here and just kind of set them up maybe a little more simply and in a maybe even almost a straight line so that we can read them a little bit more, and just let the free be the thing that I can almost see, just like, why not set her free in big bold letters, and then the free is drifting off in maybe this more whimsical kind of airy font or something like that. So maybe try a few different variations. Sometimes it can help also to just thumbnail an idea, where you just kind of put it on a little piece of paper and just kind of quickly sketch out your idea. But that's where I think you should go with this. And then I would, maybe reduce the number of colors that you have. You've got all kind of in the realm of kind of coolish colors, but maybe just pick one that you think really exemplifies it and maybe play with that. I also, like I was mentioning before with having fewer typefaces, I also think that maybe sometimes fewer colors can be really a good idea, like to just experiment with one color and let the kind of the meaning of that one color infuse your design. Each color has its own kind of meaning or symbolism, and you can really kind of let that color become, like, for example, like green has an idea of, like, sometimes it's about growth or expansion. Google has just tons of information on color symbolism. So that's what I would do here, is just experiment with making it a little more legible, maybe taking one of your great ideas and sort of pulling that in the most. All right? Yeah, I'm sure with a little bit of experimentation, I think you're going to have a really cool design. Hi, Brian. Yes, I do think taking a switch into typography is a little bit of a twist to what we have been doing, and I think it is a little challenging to start thinking about typography and its meaning. Um, yeah, so I would say in yours, let's see, they're always in my mind, these songs of hobbits, dwarves, and men, and elves. I like this. This is a really, I think what you've done here with the mind is a great idea, because the mind is always shifting, isn't it? It goes on to one thought, then another. It's sort of it's also like, it's kind of like a dream. It sort of dissolves. And so I think that's a really nice idea. And so I might just, a couple things come to mind here. One is I would make sure to pick just either warm or cool colors or a monochrome. So it looks to me like most of your design is based on the cool colors, so I might go with that, like take these, turn these into cool colors, and then even your background, because your background right now is achromatic, which means it's based on grayscale. So maybe turn that into a cool color. So that'll bring your colors together. Think about lining things up. It's almost too like your design, like the very first design we looked at is could be symmetrical. So you could, in that case, what you're lining it up to is the center. So you could make it perfectly symmetrical. I think that could work with your design. Or if you don't want to do that, then, start lining up the text a little bit here and there. Each bit of text should line up with another bit of text or something else in the design. And then the other thing I would do too is like maybe work a little bit more with contrast. So all of your text is almost the same size. Maybe make some text really big some text really small, that can really make your design just come alive. So that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Joey, oh, thank you for what you said about why you chose this. I think it's very interesting, this idea of looking at the sky, getting lost, sort of the idea of kind of, depression as well, relating to this. I can really see all that in here. And also in the color choices, it's sort of like drained of color, which I think is, I've been depressed too, and it's sort of like everything loses its flavor, it's kind of its color and its flavor. So I think that's a really nice choice. Um, and I would say in yours, actually somewhat similar to what I just mentioned to the previous design, is maybe work a little bit more with contrast, like big text versus small text, and also lining things up a little bit more. Like this is almost lined up here. I'd almost want to just, move this over a little bit and see if you could line this up with this, and maybe the question mark too, just kind of, maybe the question mark could be a really big, maybe that could be almost filling the, I almost kind of see that as possibly filling the background and having all the text floating on top, you know? Um, yeah, those are the main things. And this typeface here, this typeface, I would maybe experiment with this typeface a little bit more. This always to me seems very sort of like biblical or religious, and I kind of don't feel like that's probably what you're trying to convey here. It seems like in a way it's sort of like has it is different direction than that. So I might experiment with something else. It's really, one of the things I think is interesting about typography is how certain typefaces have this meaning that we can't really kind of pull, we cannot kind of break from the meaning of it. Like for example, the typeface from the army, I think it's like a stencil font, like it's always going to be something military. And there's like typefaces like that where they're like, they always have that, the meaning that has people have used it for. And I think this is one that just happens to be that. Okay, so that's what I'd keep experimenting with, kind of filling the space a little bit more, working with contrast, lining things up, maybe experimenting with this typeface and seeing where you go with that.